Okay. Okay. Hi. Hi. It's so good to see everyone. There's a lot of people here. Um, this is our sixth session together. It's like it's not the exciting conclusion. This is like just the next installment. We're going to talk a lot today about, well, the Pharisees, actually. It's going to be our big topic of the day. Let me get this started. Oh, I wish you would stop doing that. Yay! You see that? And are you guys on Zoom? You don't yet see the thing because I haven't shared my screen. Sorry, I'm not sure why the technology is giving me such a tough time today, but it is. Okay, you guys see a trumpet player?
Yes.
Awesome. You guys see a trumpet player? Great. Oh. Oh, that's funny. Tom said, and a sax player because Michael Hewlett's here and he's a sax player. All right. Okay, so the very first slide that I have says, Rachel, remember to turn on your recording, which we did. Great. All right, so I want to start by just saying, here's what we know so far. And if you guys on Zoom, if I move where you can't hear me, just say something. I'll hear you and they probably won't because your sound is coming through my computer, but not through the main sound system, okay? Okay, great. Now that it's our last session, I think we now finally have it down just right. So there's a few things that I want us to review because we make sure we all know the stuff that we know. You know, not everyone was here every session, and it's like watching a serial but missing an installment, and then you see the conclusion. You're like, wait a minute, how did we get there? So what we've talked about is that the way that we order our canon as a whole between Jews and Christians is different. The way that we name our canons are different, that the translation differences have given rise to different traditions, and that the purposes of the texts themselves are understood differently, and that the process of how they come to be collected works are also very different. This is not better or worse. I want to be really clear about this. If we could take one thing away from this time together, please, God, let it be this. And I say this fully cognizant of what we're watching happening in the federal courtroom in Brunswick right now, is that we seem to have this really profound need to make things that are different better and worse than each other, instead of just different from each other. That's all I want to say. I want to say, look, this looks like this, and this looks like this. And I'm not prioritizing one or the other, right? Judaism is a tool that works for me, and I am so glad that Christianity is a tool that works for you. And if it's not working for you, and you want to talk to me about it, that's fine. But I'm not here to sell Judaism to you, right? And if at some point Judaism isn't working for me and I want to talk about it with Tom, Tom would probably be my first phone call, quite frankly, but you know, right? They're just different. They're just different. That's it. There's no right. There's no wrong. They're just different. And let that be beautiful. Okay? So, oh, that was a fun slide transition. I didn't know I was going to do that. All right. So remember, we have the Jewish canon is Torah, God bless you, prophets and writings, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. And the way that the Jewish canon is put together, God bless you, is from the order of closest to God, to furthest from God. And so the books that show up in the Jewish canon first are the ones that are known to be closest to God, because God gives the Torah to Moses at Sinai, and then everything else is, its origination is a little less magnificent, quite frankly, right? So you're further from God. And as we get further in time, we're further from God in some ways. Not everybody likes that. Not everybody agrees with that, okay? But that's how the Jewish canon is organized. Most holy, closest to God, least holy, farthest from God. They're all very holy. It's, very small variations in holiness here. Within the Christian canon, the books are ordered topically. The law is all together. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. History, poetic and wise sayings, major prophets, minor prophets, apocryphal texts, New Testament. Right? It's logical and it's thought out. Not to say the Jewish canon is illogical and not thought out. It's just a different it's a different logic. Okay, wait, let me switch. There we go. So when we name these different things, these same things differently, I will call it the Hebrew Bible. The Torah and the Tanakh, they're their own entities. They live, they're vibrant, they're alive, they're stunning, thrilling pieces of my spiritual life and the spiritual lives of the Jews that I know. They're unique forms of text. When we refer to the Torah as an Old Testament, we're saying that the former exists to bring the latter into the world. There's the old one, here's the new one. That the former is outdated, and that the new one is a continuation and the same kind of thing, which I think they're very different. I think the form of the Torah and the form of the New Testament are really very different kinds of texts, right? Again, just different. Right, so we think about how we name things and what that means. And we can hear the history in the naming. If I'm in the first century, if I'm Paul, if I'm in the second century, I'm Constantine, right? If I'm these characters and I'm trying to differentiate myself from my Jewish roots, these are very smart names to use. This is the New Testament. You don't need that one. This is the one that's going to work because we all want to curry favor with God. We want to make the world run. And if we get it wrong, we're all going to die, right? Like, there is some really important enthusiasm in the salesmanship here because of what's at stake, which is the totality of humanity. No pressure, right? So it makes sense. It makes sense in that context of what they were doing. Does it still make sense to us now? Does our language change as the world has changed? Do we need to use different language? So Jewishly, the Torah, the question is, what's the Torah's job? Right? Jewishly, the Torah is a living book. It's a life book. This is how you're supposed to be in the world. And it's messy and it's complicated, and from my perspective, it's fairly incomplete. Because I think if you just took the Torah and said, I'm going to live like this, there's this guy who wrote a book called The Year of Living Biblically. It's hilarious. He takes the Torah and he goes to New York City and he lives out the letter of the law as best as he can. And he's sitting there, he's throwing stones at taxi cabs on Shabbos, and it's hilarious. I mean, it's really funny, and I'm so grateful for that because we can look at that and we can laugh and go, yeah, that's ridiculous. You've read that book. It is not telling, it's incomplete, right? It's necessary, but it's not the whole story if it's going to be your guide of how to live. You need some more stuff. Versus for Christianity, the Torah's job is to give birth to the next new thing. And I wanted to put a pregnant Mary slide up there, and that's what I was going for there. I don't know if that reads to you as pregnant Mary, but I Googled pregnant Mary, and this is what I got. So, yeah. So when we talk about the canonization, this is the first time I get to say this with my father here, because every time I talk about canonization, I talk about my dad. So my dad is one of my congregants, which is really fun. And whenever we're doing Torah study on Saturday mornings, at some point, regularly, my father will ask this question: tell me about the people who were sitting in the room when they put the text together, right? I want to know what happened in that room when they sat there and said, this text is in and this one's out and we're going to weave it together like this, right? And every time I say to my father, who's sitting here on this little tiny screen in front of me, there's no room. This space here, you guys see there, right? The room where they're all colleagues and we're sitting together and we're going to play, doesn't happen, right? It is this soft evolution of popularity, of circumstance, of all kinds of things. And a lot of our understanding of how the Jewish canon is canonized is really very blurry. We don't really know a lot about it. Versus the Christian canon, we have a lot more. Christianity said, we're going to be Christianity. We need a canon. So we're going to make one. And they sat in a room. And you have huge pieces of historical information that explains what happens and who said what and what the art, right? We don't have that. It's just really, really different. When your canon comes from, and when your canon comes from, this is the meeting and we're calling it to order and right? They're so different.
Rachel,
Yes, Becky.
you probably said, okay, begin.
History.
But was there a room?
No.
No.
Circumstance. And some of it was just that it was accepted, right? So you're sitting here in the 2nd century BCE, right? 200 years before Jesus. And the text is being used and you kind of have this set text and there's some variation, but it's largely at that point done and people are starting to write it down because they're moving around, right? So there's circumstance. And then once people are really moving around, right, like this huge thing, 586 BCE, the Jews are in different parts of the world now. So how do you have one tradition in 2 different locations? We don't. There's a huge Jewish tradition that grows out of the Babylonian rite, and a huge Jewish tradition that grows up out of the Jerusalem rite. And they come back together in like the 1000, 1200, 1400s, right? Because people keep throwing us out. And eventually we're like, oh, I know you from 586 BCE. Oh, that's what happened to you? I haven't seen you in a while. We have this joke in the Jewish world, like, you see someone and they're Jewish, and you're like, I know you from somewhere. Right? I know you from somewhere, and you can't put it together because you don't have Facebook right there to like pull up your shared friend, right? And the answer is, I know you from Sinai. And we will say this to each other. This is a real thing. This isn't just like some idea. I know you from Sinai, and it's just accepted. Like, I don't know where I know you from, but I know you from somewhere, and you're mine, and I take you. Right? This is a people that's buckshot all over the world. Right? And then they come back together, which is a really stunning piece of Jewish liturgy and Jewish law, which is not our topic for today. So circumstance, right? Because once you do that, you're like, we can't, if we add to it here, these folks won't know. And we don't want to leave them behind, which is really what you see with the Jews, right? The lost 10 tribes, which many of those people end up in, we believe, in Africa. There's a whole group of Ethiopian Jews who are pulled out of Ethiopia in the 80s. Jews in the 1980s who haven't been attached to the Jewish world since the kingdom split in 622 BCE, I think is correct. And they come back, so there's this whole operation where the Israeli groups go in and they take these Jews out of Ethiopia and bring them to Israel. And they don't have Hanukkah and they don't have Purim. Because Hanukkah and Purim are holidays that are that come into being after that split. Yeah, right? Amazing. That's also a whole other story for another time. Okay, so when we talk about the translations and how things go different from the translations, right, remember that the Greek, the Septuagint, here in 200 BCE, sort of becomes a spin-off for a whole other tradition. Right? It gets translated into the Greek because you have Jews who don't know Hebrew. They only know Greek. This is written for Jews. Nobody else cares. Right? So here it is, it's translated into the Greek. And then we come later, and this I think is so important. This like struck me the other day. I was like, oh, this is a big deal. This differentiation between when you say Bible, you mean canon. And when I say Bible, I mean Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And here I suspect is when it happens. Because in the 1st century CE, we get a term for it. The Pentateuch. Why did you have to point out that the 5 books were the 5 books? Because somebody was going, all of it. And someone goes, no, 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 not all of it, just these five. Right? I think that's significant. I have no historical proof about that, but it strikes me as like, oh, that would make sense in the first century, that you're seeing this divide because the Septuagint includes the Apocrypha and the Jewish canon does not. And so you have more people who are following this other canon. You've got some people who are saying, I mean just this, so we have to give it a name. Right, so you have the Pentateuch. And then, of course, the Vulgate in 382 comes along, which becomes the foundation for Catholic understanding of text. Right? Oh, right, I put a little Jewish star there. The Pentateuch. Okay. Right, so remember we looked at this translation, and this translation comes from the Septuagint, where we look at the word, whether or not it's Mary a virgin. Right? Ha'alma is the Hebrew word. It's similar to the English word for young woman or maid. The mistranslation occurred when this text was translated into the Greek in the Septuagint, where the word parthenos, meaning virgin, is used. The Hebrew word virgin is betulah and cannot be found anywhere in the original Hebrew text. Meaning the original writer did not intend specifically to focus on this person's virginity, but rather her youngness. Right? But if you look at the Septuagint, it's a right translation. Septuagint says virgin. The Hebrew says young woman. And two totally different traditions grow out of this place. I once was at my synagogue, and I was talking to some church group who came in. I can't remember who it was. And I mentioned that I went to Boston College. And in Boston College, one of my core courses was an Old Testament and a New Testament class. And this person raises their hand. He says, you mean to tell me you've read the New Testament? And I said, yes. He said, you've read the whole thing? I said, yes. I got an A in that class, right? I did fine. And he says, I don't understand. And I said, are you asking me how is it possible that I've read the New Testament and I'm not Christian? And he said, yes. And I said, because I grew up with this tradition. Like all of these things that I'm telling you about, this is how I learned them. And this is how you learn them. And if I had learned these things this way, maybe I would be standing here as Pastor Rachel Bregman instead of Rabbi Rachel Bregman from us. Right? But these fundamental differences give birth to these totally different and yet totally not different entities. Right? Just different. Just different. That's like the mantra, just different. Just different. And like really, if I could show you all the differences really so beautiful. And we spent a lot of time last week talking about who is in charge. Right? If God is in charge, then the rules work one way. And if God made the world and then put people in charge, then the rules work another way. And we got to read that great piece of Talmud text, The Oven of Achnai, which is just one of my all-time favorites, and it's really fun to share with all of you guys last week. Okay, so the question that comes up as we move into the first century is the Torah enough to get the job done? Remember, we're asking two different questions. So Jewishly, I'm asking, is the Torah enough to get the job done of telling me how to live my life according to law and ethics, right? And by the way, Judaism and Christianity both give the answer, no, it's not. Because Judaism says we need this oral tradition. We need someone to explain to us what the heck this means and to translate it into law so that we can follow the rules so that we can curry favor with God, right? This is the path to win God's favor so the world will endure. We're all in it for the long-term survival here. And Christianity says no, also says no. It's the beginning of a story. Here's the next part of the story so that you can do it this way so that we can curry God's favor. Sorry, I'm moving away. Curry God's favor and we can perpetuate the human species on Earth. It's the exact same thing. They just answered one question differently. Like, is this text enough? Now, here's the part where it starts to get, I think, really funny. Fascinating, right? Okay, so we go back in time, and we can see there's different versions of the Bible And they ultimately, they start to, Gutenberg really like sets it in whatever that was, 1400, 1480 something, I think. But like, there's still these slight variations in biblical texts amongst the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and those who are outside of Israel, Palestine. Okay? This is first century. So as much as, Becky, to your question, is it closed? I mean, yeah, it's closed. Kinda. It's an oral tradition. So what happens when you write down an oral tradition? There's still going to be some variation, right? And my favorite example of that is Genesis, and maybe a different day when we have obscene amounts of time, we'll talk about the two stories of creation in Genesis. Yes? Okay, great. Sometimes people go, there's only one story of creation in Genesis. You're reading a different Bible. Someone said that to me once when they were a pastor, and I was like, did you go to seminary? Okay. They did, as it turned out. Okay, so I want to talk about who these people are who have these different texts. Oh, you guys can't see that either, can you? That's annoying. Usually I'm the only one. No, I know, Mom, you can see it. That's my mom who's giving a thumbs up there. Okay, so we have the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, right? The Essenes, we'll talk about last. They're really cool and really interesting, but they have the smallest piece in some ways until 1946, I believe. Because the Essenes are the folks who are, they're like this really extremist group. They're going to preserve everything. They're really rigid around the tradition. They have this group, they call themselves Yachad, which means like oneness, it means like togetherness or unity, right? And their stuff gets lost with them, and these are the Dead Sea Scrolls that are found about 75, almost 100 years ago, by Solomon Schechter. The Sadducees, and these Essenes, right, who are like these Yekis, you don't know what that means. They're really exacting. And the way they refer to the Pharisees and Sadducees is both particularly unkind. They both felt like neither one was really getting it right. So the Essenes referred to the Sadducees as Ephraim and Manasseh, who rebelled from the Davidic kingdom and set up a rival cult. It was like a little bit of a noise. But really, they didn't like the Pharisees at all. This might be where the anti-Pharisaic mood grows into the world. Because here are these things who are like conservation, right? God is in charge. God is still in charge. God gave us the Torah. Don't touch it. Don't add to it. Don't take away from it. That's the Essenes. And the Pharisees are like, God gave us the Torah, and it's ours now, and we need to do some stuff with it to make it work for us. And so the Essenes refer to the Pharisees as Darhei Halakot, which means pursuers of leniency, whereas the Pharisees referred themselves as Dorshei Halakot, seekers of law. This is a little play on words. I'm Hebrew nerding out with you here, and I see that it's not fun. Okay, right? So they call themselves Dorshei Halakot, and the other people call them Dorshei Halakot. But fine, okay. They're making fun of them, right? Oh, you think you're seekers of the law, but really you're seeking how to be like wet noodles, right? That's it, right? You are the wet noodle Jews, okay? And they all intersect, but they're all living here all at the same time. And they all intersect together. Okay, let me switch. Thank you. The Pharisees and the Sadducees are the two mainline groups at the first century. Okay? So we've got two different characters here. We'll do the Pharisees first. So the Pharisees include Hillel. This is like a funny moment here. There's like this revelatory moment because I'm going to tell you what happens next. Well, actually, jump ahead to the next slide. And then we'll go back. For Jews, the Pharisees are the good guys. And for Christians, the Pharisees are the bad guys. And this is really fascinating to me. So I want us to go back and look at that. Okay, so the Pharisees, there's these two Statler and Waller characters in the Talmud. Actually, they start in the Mishnah, which is a second century text, Hillel and Shammai. And they're like these foils. They're probably real people, but they also have these whole schools that grow up around them. Hillel is always right except for 3 times. They're always like in fights with each other, right? Well, Hillel says this, and Shammai says this, and Hillel says that, right? Shammai is much more restrictive. Hillel is much more inclusive. There's this beautiful piece of text that grows out of the golden rule, which is what Tom preached about this morning. And this is like what the Jewish take on it with Hillel and Shammai. Somebody comes to Shammai, he wants to convert to Judaism. And he says, teach me everything I need to know about Judaism while I'm standing on 1 foot. Right? And Shammai, who is also like a builder, has like a square ruler thing, throws it at him and says, get out of here. Get out of my office. Just roll down. This person goes down the street, right, goes 2 doors down to Hillel's office, knocks on the door and says, tell me everything I need to know. I want to convert. Tell me everything I need to know about Judaism while I'm standing on 1 foot. To which Hillel says, what is hateful to you, don't do to anyone else. The rest is commentary. Go forth and study. Hillel's the Pharisee. He's the hero in that story. This might be weirding you out. Right? Okay, good. Right. We'll get there. Right. So Pharisees are understood through their strict orientations for the law. They want to hold on to the law. But more than anything, they want to hold on to the tradition. And they're willing to move things around to allow for the tradition to endure through the reality that is. Which is, we are a people that is disliked in this world and is being thrown out hither and yon. We have no ability to maintain power and control in our own homeland. We are being sent away. We're always serving someone else. Right? How do we do this? I said, you got to flex a little. Paul identifies himself as a Pharisee. I find this surprising because Christianity generally doesn't really like Pharisees, but Paul is a hero. So he identifies himself as a Pharisee. And the Pharisees are the proto-rabbinic movement. Right? So we'll talk about the history in just a second there of how they get there. But Judaism today is born out of the Pharisaic tradition. Judaism today is born out of the Pharisaic tradition. So the Sadducees are right there, the counterpoint. That's Shammai who said, make your study of the Torah a permanent endeavor, speak little and accomplish much, and receive every man with a cheerful disposition. Which is a little surprising for Shammai because he sort of was a jerk. He threw the slide rule at the guy, right? Like it's the same character. But he thought it was important to go around the world and be pleasant. Be rigid, be structured, be studied, be pleasant. It was connected to the high priesthood, right? The Sadducees of the priestly tradition, and they get their name from Zadok, who was the high priest at the time of David and Solomon. And the priesthood is taken over, this is really interesting, the priesthood is taken over by the Maccabees. However, the Sadducees remain very prominent. Right? So the Maccabees are 155 BCE, I think that's right, about then. Okay, so that's a really critical point in history in this Pharisee-Sadducee fight, right? So it's Judaism, Christianity, Pharisee, Sadducees. Okay. When I Googled a picture for Pharisees, they were all very unhappy, grumpy-looking men. So I get it. I was like, okay, we don't like the Pharisees. I understand, right? So here's this beautiful text that I came across in Christianity Today, which I hope is a reasonable source. Nobody's booing or it's like very popular, pop culture-y. I get it. Like it wasn't a serious text, but also I thought it was perfect. The stereotype that they were, being the Pharisees, were legalists, picky and meticulous, tells a fraction of their story. Right? So that's what I understood is the Christian understanding of Pharisees. Right? That they're really exacting, which is really much more than Sadducees. It's an incomplete story. They were progressive, in that they believed the law could be updated and adjusted. They were liberals in that they were willing to adjust observance to new conditions. They were conservatives in their profound respect for their accumulating traditions. And they were nomists. I don't call them legalists because that's a bad stereotype apparently. In that they wanted others to practice their decisions on how best to observe the law, right? Everybody thinks they know the way to curry favor with God so that we can survive in this world. They were moderates in their in-betweenness of leniency and openness. And they were populists, and that plenty of evidence shows that they were popular amongst the masses. Thus, yes, like Catholics and Orthodox in adding traditions to the Bible, like evangelicals in their commitment to the Bible and its interpretation, they were not the Bible alone and only the Bible, as we've seen. They weren't those types, but they did go to the Bible for their support. That's a fuller picture of what the Pharisees were like, and that's where Judaism grows out of. I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, and I was like, blah, 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 and the Pharisees, are the good guys, and this friend of mine who grew up in a Christian household was like, what? And I was like, okay, great, I gotta spend some time explaining to you that perhaps the view within Christianity of what the Pharisees were like is incomplete. And so I was really happy to find this text in Christianity today because I felt like it did that from a Christian voice, and so I hope that works. Okay. This is a little more about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and then we're going to put together now this idea of who's in charge, God and man, and we'll see how this argument shakes out. So the Pharisees, again, they become the birthplace of rabbinic Judaism. You have Hillel, Yochanan ben Zakkai. Yochanan ben Zakkai, we're going to tell the story of Yavne in a moment. We're going to come back to Yochanan ben Zakkai and Gamliel the first, so hang on to those names loosely. I promise I'll bring them back. They are the originators of the oral Torah. They believe in ordination or smicha, right? Man is in charge because I can go and learn enough that another human being can say to me, you're ready to be a rabbi. Versus my parents were rabbis, their parents were rabbis, their parents were rabbis. It's in my blood and it's born to me, right? That's God's in charge. Ordination says man has a role to play. People have a role to play. That you can earn things through your human endeavors. Their center of everything was the house of study, not the house of sacrifice. Right? Out of the Pharisees. Their resurrection beliefs. This is like maybe one of the other classes we'll do next. We'll do the Messiah and Messianic ideas in the first century. So this is what these guys thought. That the soul is independent of the body. Right? So your soul can come back. Your body can come back. Your soul can go off. Your body can stay here. And when it's time, the body can come back. Why not? God can do that. God can do anything. The converts are allowed.
Rachel, you're fading.
I'm saying.
There you go. Yeah.
The conversion is allowed. Because again, people are in charge. You can choose your faith. Let's flash forward to 2022 for a second, and let's talk about Whoopi Goldberg for just a moment. And let's talk about the Nazis for just a moment, and the question about whether or not you can choose your faith, and is Jewish a race? For the Pharisees, it was not a race. It was a religion. And just like most other people, you could pick your religion, and you could put it down, and you could pick another religion. And somewhere along the way, Jews lose that choice. Jewish becomes DNA. We lose our nation, and what we have is religion. That becomes our nationhood. We're ex-Israelis, which we're not. We're not. Nothing wrong with them. I love Israel. They're crazy over there. And so when we get into the 40s, the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s, there's science that says that this is what the race of people known as Jews look like. It's like this. Curly hair. I don't have a particularly overly sized nose, but apparently that's like a Jewishy thing, right? My horns, which I left at home. My tail, it's in the car. No joke, when I went to Boston College, I had somebody ask me about my horns and my tail, and I was like, they just didn't know. They thought it was real. It was a look on your face. Right? I wasn't upset because I knew it was ignorance. But like, what a world we live in, right? So at that point in time, racially, Jews were not European. They weren't white. And then, Michael just did a laugh there. It's great. Right? And then at some point in the 40s, we're still stuck with our Jewishness, right? You can't not be Jewish. You can't un-Jewish in the world. I mean, you can in the Jewish world. You can. But now at this point, like, you're like, you can remember, you can always come back. We'll take you. Because the world is going to give you back to us, by the way, right? Like, you can never un-Jewish. It's now in your blood. That happens in the 20s and 30s, right? Like in the 40s into the 50s, post World War II, you have the explosion of suburbia. This new idea that people will live in these little enclaves. And throughout history, what have Jews done? People have had ideas of wanting to settle a new frontier, and they send the Jews, because the Jews don't belong to anywhere, and they go there and you settle. And then the mother country comes, and then they kick the Jews out, right? That's what we do. So in the 40s and the 50s, we got to go live in the suburbs. Because most Jews, not all, by a long shot, are pigmented white. And here's where you see the shift in race into pigmentocracy, about what color your skin is. So because we were white skin, we racially become white in the 40s. Those of us who have white skin. A lot of Jews who don't have white skin. Right? So when Whoopi Goldberg gets up and she says that the Holocaust was not about race, it was white on white violence, she is incorrect for 1948, or for 1920s and 30s. But she's 100% correct for 2020, 2022. I know what year it is. It's fine. Right? But this all begins back here with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Whoopi Goldberg is totally tied to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who sit there and say, which is the huge conversation with Paul, can you or can you not convert? If you can convert, it means that you have agency as a human being. That God gives you what you got, and you take the hand you're dealt and you play it. And if God's 100% in charge, what you get is what you get. You get what you get, and you don't pitch a fit. I have a 6-year-old. We know these turns of phrase. Right? So that conversion piece is really interesting. And how fascinating is it that the two really significant converts are Ruth and Naomi. Ruth and Naomi are the direct descendants of the Davidic line, who are the direct descendants of Jesus, comes from converts. That's really important in this fight in the first century about whether or not it's the Pharisees or the Sadducees. It's God's in charge, man's in charge. We can change the Torah or we can't. We can add to it. We can take things away. Right? That's the fight that they're having. Okay, I'll not go so long into the rest of the stuff because you guys have to go to church in like 5 minutes. Okay, so the Sadducees on the other side, we've got Shammai. Written Torah is enough. Birthright, right? Your Jewishness is your birthright. Hi guys, we'll see you. What's up later? I know how to find you both. That everything is God-given. Their focus is the place, the house of worship, right? The sacrificial system. And largely, by the way, the Sadducees are nationalists. Where you're born, that's what God gives you. That's your place. That's your home. You don't leave. National pride. I know, it's scary. I just said national pride in 2022. right? But that's what it is. God's in charge. God put me here. This is my God-given right to be this person in this place, because this is where I was born. You can't change that. And you can't take it from me. Right? Right? Hear these tropes through time. Okay, Dead Sea Scrolls, here they are. This is Solomon Schechter. We don't have time for me to tell you about all that. Or the Maccabees either, which is probably a fight between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So what we have here that I want to tell you about is there used to be the Sanhedrin, which is the rabbinic council. When the second temple was destroyed, there's a group of people, Yochanan ben Zakkai is their leader. He sneaks out and they start a whole new rabbinic council at a place called Yavna, which is like south of Tel Aviv, right, in Israel. The leadership at the time of the destruction of the second temple was all Sadducees. But with the destruction of the second temple, the guy who makes it out is Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he's a Pharisee. And you see this epic shift within Judaism to the Pharisaic tradition, from the Sadducee tradition. And it's the Pharisees who survive, which is how rabbinic Judaism comes into being. I don't have time to tell you all these details, right? But Jesus lives in this world of the Sadducees being in charge. And then Paul, who's post-destruction of the Second Temple, lives in the world of the Pharisees being in charge. It's really interesting to think about how they conceived of the world in really different ways. So, don't have time for that too. Okay, I touched on all the high points. Don't worry, you're not missing anything. I just did it differently than I thought I would. So this is the last thing I want to close with. So we began with Amy Jill Levine, and I want us to end with Amy Jill Levine. Right? Amy Jill Levine is this beautiful, wonderful, extraordinary mind person who wrote she does all kinds of writing. But specifically, I found this in the Jewish Annotated Guide to the New Testament, where she looks at the New Testament and says, these are the Jewish parts. And here's an article that's in that book. Nevertheless, it seems the successful rise of Christianity was based on the transformation of a leader, Jesus of Nazareth, who came from an environment favorable to a nationalistic movement, Sadducees, and whom Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, took to be the leader of such a movement. Right? Here's this guy who's on the column over here. I think I put all the Sadducees on this side. Right? Here's Jesus. He's on this side. And it gets transformed into the personification of a universalistic mission aimed at all humankind. Moving to this side. The reader of this volume is left to ponder how the failure of a movement to restore Israel, Christianity as a nationalist movement to restore Israel, I'd never thought of it that way before, became instead a victory over death, and how the mission associated with Jesus changed from one devoted to national salvation to one focused on individual salvation. The answer is Paul, I'm pretty sure. But I leave it to you guys to wrestle with that. So we're ending here. Are you okay? I just threw a lot of stuff at you about the Pharisees, and I've been a little nervous about it because I don't see the Pharisees in the same way that your tradition is teaching you to see the Pharisees, and I just want to make sure I didn't hurt everybody because it's important to me. Okay, good. So we're going to leave it here. I'm going to leave you to think about it, and Randy's going to send me 7 emails about the conversations we had with Don about it, which is great, because that's actually how I do so much of my learning. So please join Randy in that tradition. You are invited cordially to our house of worship on the 5th for Havdalah and to show off the Torah scrolls. We'll take them out, we'll show them around, we'll have a beautiful time, it'll be amazing. Details, you have all the details, but we'll send an official thing. And other than that, I hope you have a beautiful season of Lent. I know you're moving into that time very, very soon. And it has been an honor and a privilege and a pleasure and a delight and a joy to have these weekends with you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Have fun at church. Thanks, everyone. Go to church, don't be late. Don't get me in trouble at time.
Did anyone lose an earring?
Somebody will clean it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome so much. Oh, I'm so glad.
Tell your folks to call an Annabelle.
Paul and Annabelle came to all the classes. Paul was just telling me that I should tell you that.
So good to see you.
Hey, you're not wearing your
Hey,
mask.
Ellen. This is Brenna and this is Stacy, and you guys know Ellen.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Megan.
I know who you are.
I was gonna say something, but then you started, so I was like, okay. Hello.
It's
Me with the
Megan.
mask. It's Megan.
Hey.
Who's that?
It's Megan.
Yeah, it's Megan.
Hi, Megan. Good to see you.
Nice.
We saw Allison Dupuy yesterday.
What?
Allison.
What about Allison?
Allison Dupuy. She's a guide at Mosaic. We saw her yesterday.
Oh, good. Good. Oh, very nice. How's everyone here on Zoom World?
Fine, you're still recording.
Oh, we're still recording. I'll stop. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah.